Noah felt a sharp stab of pity the moment he looked at Tate. Tate was shivering so violently that his entire body trembled. His arms were wrapped tightly around himself, but they did nothing to stop the cold that had seeped deep into his bones. The tips of his fingers had turned an alarming shade of blue, matching the bluish tint spreading across his lips. Every shallow breath escaped in a shaky cloud as his teeth chattered uncontrollably. It should have satisfied Noah. After everything Tate had said, every cruel word, every insult, every reminder that Noah meant nothing to him, Noah should have turned around and walked away. Tate had made it abundantly clear that he wanted nothing from Noah. He had treated him like he was beneath him, like he was an inconvenience, something to be discarded and forgot. Yet Noah couldn't do it. He hated that he couldn't. No matter how deeply Tate wounded him, no matter how cruel or heartless he became, there wasn't a single part of Noah that could stand there and watch him suffer. It was simply impossible. Compassion overpowered resentment every single time. Even if helping Tate meant humiliating himself. Even if it meant crawling back to someone who had just treated him like garbage. Even if Tate rejected the help, mocked him for offering it, or used his kindness against him. Noah couldn't leave. Not like this. Not while Tate's body shook so hard it looked painful. Not while his lips and fingertips were turning blue from the cold. Not while every instinct inside Noah screamed that Tate needed warmth before something truly dangerous happened. Maybe that made Noah pathetic. Maybe it made him weak. He didn't care. Tate could call him every horrible name imaginable. He could shove him away, sneer at him, tell him to disappear forever. None of it mattered in this moment. Because, despite everything, Noah would never knowingly allow Tate Blue to suffer if he had the power to stop it. He would never leave him freezing, never abandon him to shiver alone, never stand by while someone he loved, no matter how impossible, no matter how undeserving Tate insisted he was in pain. Noah swallowed the lump in his throat. His pride could wait. Tate's well-being couldn't. Noah hadn't been lying all those years ago when he and Tate had been lying in bed together, and Noah had quietly confessed, the only place Noah Lunas wants to be is wherever Tate Blue is. It hadn't been a romantic exaggeration. It had been the absolute truth. It didn't matter if Tate humiliated him in front of other people. It didn't matter if Tate pretended he didn't even know Noah's name. It didn't matter if he paraded Chloe around school, laughing with her, holding her hand, rubbing Noah's heartbreak into every open wound. None of it changed the one constant Noah had never been able to escape. He would never truly leave Tate. Not in spirit. Not in his heart. He could walk away to protect himself. He could create emotional distance when Tate became too cruel. He could refuse to stay in situations that threatened his safety or his mental well-being. He wasn't a doormat and he wasn't incapable of saying no. But leaving Tate completely. No. There was no universe where Noah stopped loving him. It was almost embarrassing how little it took to crack every wall Noah painstakingly built around himself. Tate didn't even have to apologize. He didn't have to explain himself. Sometimes one soft look was enough. Sometimes it was the slightest gentleness in his eyes. Sometimes all it took was Tate's voice quietly saying, "Noe." That single nickname could undo months of distance in an instant. The resentment melted. The hurt loosened its grip. The walls came crashing down. If Tate genuinely needed him, Noah would find himself walking back toward him before his brain had finished reminding him why he shouldn't. He would sit beside him, help him, listen to him, or exist near him if that was what Tate wanted. His love had always been unconditional. That didn't mean Tate could abuse him without consequence. If Tate crossed the line, Noah would leave the room. He would protect his peace. He would refuse to participate in cruelty. If his emotional or physical safety was threatened, Noah would put distance between them because loving someone did not require accepting mistreatment. But consequences weren't the same as abandonment. Noah could step away while still hopping Tate was warm enough, safe enough, eating enough, sleeping enough. He could be heartbroken and still care. He could be furious and still love. That contradiction had become the defining feature of his life. Back in school, the other students used to tease Tate relentlessly. Whenever Tate defended Noah from bullies, skipped parties to stay with him, or abandoned whatever the popular crowd was doing just to make sure Noah was okay, people laughed and called Tate whipped. Tate always rolled his eyes and pretended he didn't care. But if those same students had ever asked Noah who loved harder, Noah wouldn't have hesitated. I do. Not because Tate's love wasn't real. It was. It was fierce, protective, territorial, and often buried beneath layers of pride, anger, and emotional dysfunction. But Noah's love was different. It never depended on whether Tate was kind that day. It didn't disappear when Tate pushed him away. It didn't evaporate after an argument. It survived humiliation. It survived silence. It survived rejection. It survived years of wondering whether Tate loved him back at all. Even when Tate acted like Noah meant nothing to him, Noah still loved him with a steadiness that sometimes frightened even himself. If anyone in their lives had truly known both of them and been asked which one was hopelessly whipped, the answer would never have been Tate. It was Noah. Always Noah. And he suspected it always would be. All Noah wanted, more than anything, was for the mean, cruel, spiteful man standing before him to disappear. Just vanish. In his place, he wanted the 15-year-old Tate back. The boy with the permanently messy dark hair and the mischievous grin that always made it impossible for Noah to stay annoyed for very long. The boy whose laughter filled every room he entered. The boy who looked at Noah as though there was nowhere else in the world he would rather be. Noah could picture him so vividly that, for a fleeting second, it almost felt real. Teenage Tate would be standing there with his hands shoved into the pockets of his hoodie, a crooked smile tugging at his lips as he watched Noah sulk. "What are you doing over there?" he'd ask with a laugh. Noah, arms folded dramatically across his chest, would huff just to get a rise out of him. Tate would roll his eyes in exaggerated disbelief. "Why aren't you over here keeping me warm, you silly blonde boy?" He'd close the distance before Noah even had the chance to answer. "Who gave you permission to sleep over there? Another step. Or hide in your own little house. One more. Don't you know Tate Blue needs you?" Then, without waiting for consent, or even pretending to, he'd throw an arm around Noah's shoulders and drag him exactly where he wanted him. Noah couldn't help smiling through the ache in his chest. God, Tate had been so outrageously possessive. It was almost comical. When 15-year-old Tate decided he wanted something, resistance was merely an inconvenience. He pursued whatever had caught his attention with the single-minded determination of a dog that had found a bone and refused to let anyone else near it. And somehow, that something was almost always Noah. If Tate wanted Noah sitting beside him, Noah would find himself unceremoniously hauled across the sofa until their shoulders touched. If Tate wanted him in bed, he'd simply peel back the blankets and declare, "Get in." If Noah protested that he wanted to sleep in his own room for once, Tate acted as though he'd just suggested moving to another continent. "No." That was usually the entire argument. "No. But. No. No." And somehow Tate always won. Not because Noah was afraid of him. Because Tate was impossible to outlast. He would pout, bargain, complain, dramatically accuse Noah of abandoning him, cling to his sleeve, steal his pillow, or simply lie across Noah until moving became physically impossible. There was an innocent stubbornness to it then, an almost childish certainty that of course Noah belonged beside him. Of course they'd fall asleep together. Of course Noah would stay. In Tate's 15-year-old mind, that was simply the natural order of the universe. Eventually, Noah would laugh, surrender with theatrical exasperation, and crawl into bed beside him. Tate's smug grin of victory would appear every single time. There, he'd mumble, already settling comfortably against Noah, "That's better." Within minutes, he would be asleep. Looking at the man in front of him now, Noah realized what he missed wasn't just the younger Tate. He missed the boy who had never questioned whether Noah belonged with him. The boy who had needed him without shame. The boy who could ask for affection without disguising it as anger. The boy who had once looked at Noah as though sharing the same bed, the same room, the same quiet moments was the most obvious thing in the world. Noah would have given almost anything to hear that carefree voice one more time. "Quit pouting, Noe. Instead, all that remained was silence, and the memory of a 15-year-old boy who had loved so openly that he never imagined there could come a day when he'd push Noah away instead of pulling him close. It felt like a death. Not the kind marked by a funeral or a gravestone, but the slow, agonizing grief of watching someone still breathe while the person you loved seemed to disappear piece by piece. Noah looked at Tate and couldn't reconcile the man in front of him with the boy he carried so vividly in his memories. Whoever this person was calling himself Tate Blue. He was a travesty. A tragedy. Because if you had ever known the real Tate Blue, you would understand why Noah couldn't simply stop loving him. Where was the teenager who had told his own uncle to fuck off at the breakfast table when Joey tried to interrupt one of Noah and Tate's conversations? Tate hadn't cared that Joey was older or that everyone else at the table had gone silent. Noah came first, and everyone knew it. Where was the stubborn 15-year-old who had climbed on top of Noah's bedroom door after Noah's parents tried to keep them apart? He had sprawled across the frame like a barricade, arms folded behind his head, declaring that if Noah couldn't come out, then Tate wasn't leaving either. He'd stay there all day if he had to. Where was the boy who treated every wall between them as a personal insult? The boy who refused to sleep unless Noah was beside him. The boy who thought personal space was merely a suggestion. The boy who wore his love so openly that it embarrassed everyone except himself. Noah mourned him as though he had been buried years ago. Because the man standing here wore the same face. He had the same dark hair. The same familiar eyes. The same voice. But something essential had vanished, leaving behind someone Noah barely recognized. It was like meeting a stranger who happened to have Tate's body. That realization hurt more than Noah could put into words. He swallowed hard before slowly stepping closer. Every instinct warned him that Tate might snap, might shove him away, might spit another cruel remark simply because kindness had become so foreign to him. Still, Noah couldn't stop himself. He stopped just close enough that Tate would have room to retreat if he wanted to. His movements were careful, almost tentative, as though approaching a frightened animal that had forgotten how to trust. Without saying a word, Noah reached out. Not enough to trap him. Not enough to force affection. Just enough that, if Tate allowed it, his hand could rest lightly against Tate's cold forearm, offering warmth instead of demands. Noah searched his face. "I know you probably don't want me anywhere near you," he said softly, his voice almost breaking, "so I won't push." He gave the faintest, saddest smile. "But you don't have to be cold alone." For a moment, Noah almost imagined the old Tate answering. "About time, Noe, get over here." The memory made his chest ache. Because that boy would have already been wrapped around him, complaining dramatically about freezing to death while secretly smiling into Noah's shoulder. Noah missed him with the kind of grief usually reserved for the dead. And somehow, that grief hurt even more because Tate was standing right in front of him. "Do you want me to call somebody?" Another pause stretched between them. The wind pressed against the house again, faint but constant, as if it were testing the walls. Tate's shoulders trembled once more, smaller now, harder to hide. Noah finally stepped forward and placed the blankets on the edge of the bed, not forcing them closer, just making them available, like a decision instead of a demand. Then he stopped. "I'm not going to make you do anything," he said, "but I'm also not going to pretend this is okay." Pale in the dim light, Noah watched as the man so many admired, the untouchable Tate Blue, the wealthy businessman, the millionaire everyone envied, lay shivering beneath his own duvet. His breaths came in uneven little hitches, each one ending in a pitiful whimper that barely sounded human. Then Noah saw it. Tate's fingertips. They were turning blue. Not metaphorically, literally. The familiar dusky shade crept over his fingers, the same frightening color Noah had seen countless times when they were children. Back then, it had always meant Tate's body was failing to regulate itself, usually after he'd become overwhelmed or terribly cold. His chest tightened. This wasn't the confident executive who commanded boardrooms and intimidated grown men into silence. This wasn't the brilliant millionaire who always seemed in control. This was just Tate. Cold. Helpless. Dependent on someone else to notice he wasn't okay. Compassion tugged painfully at Noah's heart. Every instinct screamed at him to cross the room, peel back the duvet, and slide in beside him. He knew his own body ran warm. He could wrap an arm around Tate, press their bodies together, share his warmth until the trembling stopped. Maybe just having someone there would calm whatever storm was brewing inside him. His feet almost moved, but memory held him where he stood. Years ago, after Noah had returned from the cruise following his mother's death, grief had driven him to seek the only comfort he'd ever truly wanted. He'd quietly climbed into Tate's bed, desperate not for anything romantic or selfish, just to feel less alone. He'd barely settled before Tate had woken. The kick had come without hesitation. Tate's heel had slammed hard into Noah's thigh, sending him sprawling off the mattress onto the floor. "Get out." Nothing more. Just a brutal reminder that he wasn't welcome. Even now, years later, Noah could almost feel the phantom ache in his leg. He looked back at the bed. This time was different. Tate didn't look angry. He looked fragile. His teeth chattered violently, every muscle seemed locked in a desperate tremor, his breathing becoming quicker and shallower with each passing second. His fingers were growing darker, his lips losing what little color they had left. Noah's stomach twisted. He'd seen enough of Tate's episodes over the years to recognize the warning signs, the rigid muscles, the uncontrollable shaking, the way he seemed trapped inside his own body. He looked like he was winding tighter and tighter, every tremor another turn of a spring ready to snap. Noah's pulse quickened. He's working himself toward a seizure. The thought hit him like a punch to the chest. For one reckless moment, Noah didn't care if Tate threw him out again. He didn't care if he was kicked, sworn at, or told to leave. Because the man curled up in that bed didn't look capable of protecting himself anymore. He looked like someone who was freezing, frightened, and losing control of his own body. Noah took an involuntary step toward the bed, torn between respecting the boundaries Tate had always enforced and the unbearable urge to ignore them if it meant keeping him safe. Noah found himself drifting back to better years, to the days when Tate had worshipped him with a devotion that had seemed unshakable. He remembered lying awake beside him at night, listening to Tate murmur things that had never left him. "I'll become a Noah, but you'll never become a Tate. The reason I ran, Noah, is the reason you stayed. Whatever comes after this, I'll take it again." And then there was the one that had always been Noah's favorite. "Love me, hate me, I care not why, I only want my heart to touch yours." Those words echoed through Noah's mind like ghosts from another lifetime. Where had that boy gone? Where was the fiercely loyal teenager who had loved him so completely that the rest of the world barely seemed to exist? The one who would have followed Noah anywhere without hesitation, who had looked at him as though he hung the stars themselves. Because the man before him bore almost no resemblance to that memory. The hazel-eyed man lying in the bed they had shared for years was shivering violently beneath the blankets, his lips and fingertips slowly turning blue with cold. His expression, once so open and adoring whenever Noah entered a room, had been replaced by a permanent scowl, hard edges, and barely restrained anger. He looked more like a stranger or a bully than the boy Noah had grown up with. It was as though someone had stolen Tate away years ago and left behind only a colder, harsher imitation. A man who carried the same face but none of the warmth, tenderness, or unwavering devotion Noah had once known. And despite everything that had happened between them, despite every cruel word and every scar they had given each other, Noah still couldn't stop searching for that lost boy in the man shivering helplessly before him. Noah crossed the room and, after a moment's hesitation, sat down on the edge of his ex-buddy's bed. The sudden shift in the mattress made Tate flinch, his hazel eyes snapping toward Noah in alarm before settling into their usual guarded glare. Even so, the violent shivering never stopped. His body trembled uncontrollably beneath the duvet, his fingers already tinged an unsettling shade of blue. Noah frowned. "Do you have a doctor I can call?" he asked quietly. "A nurse, a friend, anyone." Tate didn't answer. Noah studied him for a long moment, his concern growing with every passing second. "I can't just leave you up here," he said, his voice softening despite himself. "Not like this." His eyes drifted to Tate's blue fingertips before meeting his gaze again. "I can't leave you to turn into a marble statue." Tate didn't answer. He just sat there, breathing unevenly, caught between pride and discomfort, the cold winning quietly in the background, no matter how hard he tried to ignore it. Ever since Noah opened the door, the air in the room felt wrong. Not just cold, dense with it, like the temperature had settled into everything and refused to move. The lamp on the bedside table was still on, casting a weak yellow circle over the bed, but it didn't soften anything. It only made the contrast worse. Tate was shaking, not the subtle shiver from earlier. This was deeper, his whole body uncontrolled. His shoulders jerked in uneven rhythm, his hands twitching slightly against the sheets like his nervous system couldn't decide what to do with itself. His breathing was wrong, too fast, then catching, then too shallow to be useful. Noah stopped in the doorway. "Tate," he said immediately, voice tightening without him meaning it to. "Hey, are you okay?" Tate didn't answer. His head was tilted slightly forward, eyes half-lidded, unfocused. His skin had gone pale in a way that edged past cold and into something more concerning, an almost bluish tone along his lips and fingertips, like his body was struggling to keep circulation where it needed to be. Noah moved in quickly now, crossing the room. "Tate, look at me." Tate tried, it wasn't fully successful. His jaw clenched once like he was trying to force control back into his body. Another tremor ran through him, sharper this time, and his breath hitched in his throat. Noah crouched beside the bed, watching him closely, taking in everything at once. The shaking, the breathing, the way Tate wasn't fully responding the way he should. "You're not okay," Noah said, more certain now. Tate's lips moved slightly, but it took a moment for sound to come through. "Cold," he managed, voice strained, barely more than air. "I know," Noah said quickly, "I know." He reached for Tate's shoulder, then hesitated just a fraction, checking first, careful, not forcing contact. When Tate didn't pull away, Noah steadied him lightly, just enough to anchor him. This wasn't just stubbornness anymore, it wasn't just discomfort. Noah's mind went through it fast. The heater, the temperature drop, the shaking that looked neurological, not just physical fatigue. Tate's body wasn't regulating properly. Stress, cold, exhaustion stacked too far. "Tate," Noah said again, firmer, "you've had this before like this." Tate's eyes flickered slightly, like it took effort to focus. "Cold," he repeated again, but weaker. Noah straightened abruptly and reached for the phone on the nightstand. "I'm calling someone," he said. Tate made a small sound, half protest, half breath. "No." "Yes," Noah cut in, not raising his voice but not giving space for argument either. "You're shaking like this and your breathing is off." He picked up the receiver. "What's Chloe's number?" Noah asked quickly, already trying to work through options. "I'll call her." Tate swallowed hard, the motion visible in his throat. "Boston," he said, voice thin, chilled through. "She's in Boston, she won't be back for a while." Noah paused. That shifted the situation immediately. He looked back at Tate, the trembling worse now, the way his body seemed to be slipping in and out of steadiness. Not dramatic, not loud, but unstable in a way that didn't wait for permission. Noah set the phone back down. "Okay," he said, voice lower now, more focused. "Then we're not waiting for her." Tate's eyes drifted toward him again, unfocused but listening. Noah's heart clenched as he watched Tate shiver uncontrollably on the edge of the bed. The heater had sputtered out hours ago, leaving the small cabin in a biting chill that seeped through the walls like an unwelcome intruder. Tate's skin had taken on a deeper, darkish, bluish tint, his lips trembling as he struggled to draw in each breath. Noah knew all too well about Tate's condition, his body's inability to regulate temperature, a vulnerability that had defined so many moments in their shared history. But what could he do? The fire was low, the blankets insufficient. With a heavy sigh, Noah turned to fetch more wood from outside, his tennis shoes scraping against the wooden floor. Noah liked being useful. Ever since he had learned about Tate's condition, he'd quietly taken pride in being the one who kept Tate warm at night. It gave him a purpose. He wasn't just lying beside him, he was protecting him. Tate was the richest boy in Lowe's Angels. Being around someone so respected, admired, and envied by everyone else might have done a little for Noah's confidence, but that had never been the reason he stayed. He didn't want Tate's money. He didn't want his status. He didn't want to gain anything from being close to him. He simply liked Tate. At home, Noah's mother had never given him the feeling of being needed. His desire to be useful had gone unnoticed, unfulfilled. But then there was Tate, a wealthy heir with no siblings, no real friends, and no one he trusted enough to let close. Except Noah. Out of everyone in the world, Tate wanted Noah beside him. He wanted Noah's warmth wrapped around him at night so the cold wouldn't settle into his bones, so the air wouldn't steal his body heat and leave him vulnerable to illness or worse, pneumonia. For all of Tate's unimaginable wealth, there was one thing money could never buy. The comfort Noah gave him simply by being there. Noah had always felt the most loved when he was useful, when someone genuinely needed him. Not in a shallow or selfish way, but in the quiet, undeniable way that made his presence matter. Who wouldn't want to be needed? For years, Tate had needed Noah, not for his money, his name, or what he could provide, but for something no one else could give him. Noah's warmth, Noah's presence, Noah's willingness to stay beside him through long, freezing nights. Even after everything that had happened between them, even after Tate had treated him like garbage, Noah's first instinct was still to slip beneath the blankets and wrap his arms around the shivering air, sharing his body heat until the trembling stopped. But he didn't. Tate hadn't asked. And Noah refused to presume he was still wanted. Unlike many people outside his circle of friends, Noah respected boundaries. He didn't force affection, invade someone's personal space, or assume comfort would be welcomed simply because it had been before. So he stayed where he was, watching the prince shiver beneath the blankets, fighting every instinct that told him to climb into the bed and keep him warm. "You don't like the blankets I brought you?" Noah asked, sounding more irritated than he intended. "You don't want the heater and the furnace and generator can't be turned on." He glanced toward the bedroom door, thinking out loud. "Maybe we could move you downstairs by the fireplace. I'm sure I could manage the mattress, although it's pretty big, or you could just sleep on the living room floor next to the fire. It wouldn't be very comfortable, but at least you'd stay warm." Tate slowly shook his head. The movement was weak, as though he didn't have the strength to do much more than that. "It's a pity there isn't a fireplace in your room," Noah muttered, running a hand through his hair. He was running out of ideas. "I don't know what else to offer." He let out a frustrated sigh before standing. "I'm going downstairs to call the family physician. You can't just stay up here with your teeth chattering all night. I won't get any sleep." He looked at Tate's blue-tinged fingers and managed a faint, worried smile. "And you'll turn into a Smurf." Noah picked up his mobile phone. "I'll be back in 2 minutes," he said. "If you need something, just knock something onto the floor. I'll hear it from the stairs." With that, he started dialing the number he still remembered from years ago, the family physician Talia had always called when they were teenagers. He walked past the bed, his attention fixed on the screen as the call began to ring. He had nearly reached the bedroom door, putting a little distance between himself and Tate, when the slightest movement behind him brought him to an abrupt stop. Noah froze, his hand still gripping the phone, and slowly turned around. A sudden grip on his bare left hip over his night shorts yanked him backwards. Tate's fingers, icy and desperate, dug into the fabric of Noah's pajamas. "What are you doing?" Noah asked, his voice laced with surprise and concern as he spun around. Tate didn't respond with words. Instead, his eyes, wide and pleading, locked onto Noah's. With a strength born of necessity, Tate ripped Noah's shirt backwards, causing the fabric to tear in half in one swift motion. Buttons scattered across the floor like forgotten promises. Noah's protests died in his throat as Tate's hands moved to his own belt, unbuckling it with frantic urgency. "Tate, wait," Noah started, but Tate was already shoving the blonde's shorts down, removing Noah's briefs and stripping away the layers that separated them. It wasn't about desire, Noah knew that instinctively. This was survival, a ritual as old as their relationship. For 22 years, before life had pulled them in different directions, before Tate's marriage, before the year of silence, they had turned to each other in moments like this. Shared warmth, shared breath, shared solace. The movement was clumsy, both of them off balance in the dim light filtering through the frost-laced windows. Noah's legs struck the edge of the bed and the sudden momentum carried him down onto the worn mattress. The cold sheets sent a jolt through him as he landed on his back, his phone slipping from his hand onto the quilt. Without a word, Tate followed. The shivering air all but collapsed against him, pressing himself close with desperate urgency rather than aggression. His entire body was rigid with cold, his skin unnaturally cool against Noah's warmth. His lips and nose were tinged red from the freezing air, while the edges of his fingers had taken on the familiar bluish hue Noah remembered from years ago. Tate buried his icy nose into the crook of Noah's neck and breathed in slowly, instinctively seeking warmth. Every violent tremor that ran through his body told the same story: he was freezing. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Noah lay perfectly still beneath him, stunned by the sudden contact. After everything that had been said between them, after months of anger and distance, this silent plea for warmth was the last thing he had expected. Tate gently maneuvered Noah onto his back before climbing on top of him. The dark-haired married man settled above him with a weary sigh, carefully letting his weight rest across Noah instead of bearing down in one place. Nearly 50 pounds heavier, Tate had always been larger than Noah, yet somehow he instinctively knew how to distribute his weight so it never felt crushing. The moment Tate relaxed against him, Noah felt something inside himself loosen. He had missed this. For 12 long months he'd gone to bed without the familiar weight of Tate's body resting over his own. He had shared beds with other men since then, hoping the loneliness would fade, but no one had ever felt like Tate. It wasn't just his size. It wasn't just his strength, his broad shoulders, or the solid warmth of his frame when he wasn't freezing. It was everything they had shared, the childhood adventures, the countless nights spent sleeping this way, the years of trust and familiarity that no one else could ever replace. Whatever the reason, Noah had never been able to explain it. He only knew that, for years, the easiest nights to sleep had been the ones when Tate was sprawled across him, close enough that Noah could feel every steady breath. Now, after a year apart, that familiar weight had returned, not out of affection or habit but out of desperate need for warmth, and despite everything that had happened between them, it felt achingly familiar. Noah wrapped his arms around Tate's back, pulling him closer. The love of his life, yes, that's what Tate had always been, no matter the labels or the distance, lay vulnerable and nude against him, fighting to hold onto life before the freeze claimed him entirely. Noah could feel the chill radiating from Tate's body, seeping into his own warmth like a thief in the night. Tate's flaccid length pressed innocently against Noah's thigh, as cold as the rest of him, a stark reminder of the desperation rather than any spark of passion. Tate's body shook violently, tremors rippling through him like waves on a frozen lake. He was an ice cube in Noah's arms, fragile and on the verge of shattering. "Hold me closer," Noah murmured, his voice soft but firm as he tightened his embrace, rubbing slow circles along Tate's spine to coax some heat into him. "You could have just asked." Tate's breath hitched against Noah's skin, the tremors running through his body easing ever so slightly as he clung to the warmth he had been denying himself. "I know it's not a good idea," he whispered, his voice hoarse and muffled against Noah's neck, "especially after everything that's happened with my marriage." Noah swallowed hard. For a long moment he said nothing. His hands remained suspended awkwardly at his sides, unsure whether he had the right to touch Tate anymore. A year ago the decision would have been effortless. His arms would already have been around him, holding him close until the shivering stopped. Now he hesitated. "You pulled me back," Noah said quietly, "not the other way around." Tate didn't answer. His eyes remained closed as another shiver rolled through him, though it was weaker than before. The warmth trapped between their bodies was already beginning to do what blankets alone could not. "You really shouldn't be in this bed," Tate said. The words were almost absurd, considering Tate was the one who had reached out, grabbed Noah and pulled him back. Tate was the one who had dragged him away from the door and into the warmth of the bed. Not that Noah was complaining. If he was honest with himself, there was nowhere else in the world he would rather be than here, on Tate's old twin bed, in the familiar space that held years of memories neither of them ever talked about anymore. "If anyone sees us, they'll misunderstand," Tate continued. But it wasn't said with softness or concern. It wasn't the voice of the boy Noah remembered, the one who used to trust him completely. It was the voice of the angry man who had replaced him. The voice of the bully who explained things as if Noah couldn't possibly understand something obvious. The irony wasn't lost on Noah. Tate was still wrapped around him, still holding onto him like he was the only source of warmth left in the world, yet he spoke as though Noah was an inconvenience. Noah didn't argue. He simply lowered his head, resting his warm nose against the hollow of Tate's throat and breathing in quietly. The scent stopped him. Tate's cologne. Noah knew it instantly. It was the same scent he had noticed countless times over the past year whenever he had passed through the Rambler, the lingering trace of Tate in rooms where he no longer belonged, a reminder of someone who had been absent but somehow never completely gone. For a moment Noah closed his eyes. Even now, after all the anger and distance between them, Tate still smelled like home. Tate felt Noah shifting beneath him. It was something Noah had done since they were young. Even as little boys, Noah had always searched for the perfect position, the place where he felt most comfortable, where his body seemed to settle together naturally like pieces of a puzzle. At first Tate had found it annoying. 4-year-old Noah would wiggle around endlessly in bed, adjusting and readjusting, while Tate complained that he was never going to fall asleep if Noah kept moving. But after a few weeks, it became normal. Then it became a habit. Then it became part of them. Their sleeping arrangements had quietly formed around Noah's need to get comfortable and Tate's silent acceptance of it. Tate always pretended it bothered him, but eventually he stopped resisting. It was simply how things were. Years later, Noah's instincts hadn't changed. He shifted beneath Tate, trying to find that same familiar position from childhood, and the movement caught Tate off guard. Noah accidentally bumped him in an uncomfortable spot near his crotch, causing Tate to tense and pull back slightly. "Careful," Tate muttered, startled. Noah immediately froze. "Sorry," he whispered. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Tate slowly relaxed again, the tension fading. The awkward interruption passed, leaving behind something much older and more familiar, the quiet understanding of two people who had spent years knowing each other's habits before they ever had the words to explain them. Tate's bare chest was pressed firmly against Noah's, the warmth between them finally pushing back against the cold that had consumed him. If anyone passing by didn't know their history, they might have misunderstood the scene completely. Two grown men tangled together in the same bed, holding onto each other in the dark, could have looked like something it wasn't. But Noah knew what this was. This was familiarity. This was years of trust, memories, and a bond that had existed long before either of them understood how much they relied on each other. And for Noah, having Tate close again was overwhelming in a way he couldn't hide. A soft sound of relief escaped him. Then another. Little contented noises slipped out before he even realized he was making them. It wasn't something he was doing intentionally. It was simply the reaction of someone finally finding a comfort he had been missing for far too long. Noah relaxed beneath Tate's weight, his shoulders easing as though his body recognized something his mind had been fighting against. For months he had missed this. Not just Tate's presence, but the feeling of being close to the one person who had always made the world feel less lonely. Tate noticed immediately. The sounds caught his attention, and his entire body stiffened. Slowly he reached over and switched on the bedside lamp. The sudden light made Noah blink up at him. Tate stared down at him, hazel eyes narrowed, a familiar scowl forming on his face. "What?" Noah asked quietly. Tate didn't answer at first. He just looked at him, clearly caught between annoyance and confusion, as if he couldn't understand how Noah could still find comfort in him after everything that had happened. But Noah could see it. Beneath the irritation was something else. A quiet realization that, despite all the anger and distance between them, some part of them still remembered exactly how to be there for each other. One sharp glare from Tate was enough. Noah immediately understood the message. He went still, closing his eyes and trying not to smile. If he weren't the one currently trapped beneath Tate's annoyed expression, he probably would have laughed. Tate looked absolutely furious, the same stubborn, irritated look he had worn since they were kids whenever Noah pushed his patience too far. Tate reached over and turned off the lamp, plunging the room back into darkness. "You're impossible," Tate muttered. Noah stayed quiet, though the smallest hint of amusement remained on his face. Because beneath all of Tate's frustration, beneath the scowl and the sharp words, Noah knew the truth. Tate had pulled him back. Tate had been the one who needed him. And even if Noah knew better than to push his luck or ignore Tate's boundaries, he couldn't deny how much he had missed the simple comfort of being close to him, the familiar warmth, the steady presence, the feeling that for once he wasn't alone. It wasn't about taking advantage. It was about remembering what it felt like to matter to someone. Noah kept his eyes closed, but he wasn't asleep. He wouldn't risk it. Not now. Not when he knew there was a chance he could wake up later to find Tate staring down at him with that familiar scowl, regret written all over his face for something neither of them had planned. Noah wanted to remember this moment exactly as it was. For once, Tate wasn't pushing him away. For once, he wasn't alone. His face rested against Tate's 8-pack and chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. The warmth that had been missing for so long surrounded him, and Noah found himself clinging to the quiet comfort of it. Tate's nose rested against the side of Noah's throat, the sharp edge of it brushing him every time Tate shifted or breathed. Under any other circumstances, Noah probably would have complained. But not now. Now it was just another familiar detail. Another reminder that this was real. After a year of missing him, after months of anger and distance, Noah had somehow ended up exactly where some part of him had always wanted to be, beside Tate, close enough to know he was still there. If this was the last peaceful moment they ever had, Noah thought he would still treasure it. Not because everything was fixed. Not because the pain between them had disappeared. But because, for a little while, the person he had spent so long missing had come back. And Noah hoped, quietly and desperately, that they had many more years ahead of them before either of them had to let go. Noah's chest ached at the proximity, the year of silence stretching between them like an unbridgeable chasm, until now. "You can always ask me to keep you warm," Noah thought, his hand coming up to cup the back of Tate's head, fingers threading through damp, cold hair. "We're buddies always, through everything." He pressed a gentle kiss to Tate's cheek, lingering there, tasting the salt of unspoken tears and the faint chill of survival. Tate's shaking eased slightly, his body molding more fully against Noah's as the shared heat began to work its quiet magic. Exhaustion pulled at him, the adrenaline of desperation fatting into weary relief. Within moments, his breathing evened out, deepening into the steady rhythm of sleep. Noah lay there, staring at the shadowed ceiling, Tate's weight a comforting anchor. For the first time in years, a profound happiness settled over him, not the fleeting kind but the deep, enduring warmth of reconnection. He held Tate through the night, whispering promises into the darkness, vowing silently that this freeze, this distance between them would be the last. Noah silently begged the universe that whatever silence had grown between Tate and himself was finally over. Maybe this was the moment that would break through Tate's walls of emotional avoidance. Maybe after sharing a bed like this, after letting Noah back into the space that had once belonged to them, Tate wouldn't be able to convince himself that he could simply throw Noah away. Noah couldn't believe that was possible. Not after this. Tate had always been drawn to Noah's body, even when their relationship was completely platonic. There had always been a comfort in the familiarity of it, in the way Tate seemed to instinctively relax when Noah was close. No matter how angry, stubborn, or guarded Tate became, he had never truly been able to deny that connection. Noah held on to that hope. Maybe Tate's walls would finally crumble. Maybe this was proof that, underneath all the hurt and distance, there was still something between them that neither of them could erase. Tate stirred as the first hints of dawn crept through the cabin's frosted windows, the clock on the wall ticking past 5 in the morning. His body had thawed somewhat during the night, the blue tint fading from his skin, but the chill lingered in the air like a stubborn ghost. He could feel Noah beneath him, the steady rise and fall of his chest indicating he hadn't slept much if at all. Tate's weight pinned Noah in place, their bare forms still entwined from the desperate warmth sharing of hours before. For a moment, Tate considered shifting away, but the habit of proximity held him still. "You can go if you want," Tate said, his voice flat and detached, cutting through the quiet like a dull blade. He lifted his head slightly, meeting Noah's eyes in the dim light. Noah managed a small smile, though it didn't reach his eyes, hidden partly by the shadow of Tate's broader frame. "If I leave, you'll freeze," Noah smiled. "It's not your job anymore," Tate replied, the words hanging heavy with unspoken history. Noah's smile faltered, but he pressed on, his voice soft and earnest. "It's not about jobs or whatever, I couldn't just let you." "We're not anything to each other," Tate interrupted coldly, his tone emotionless, a void where warmth should have been. "We're not buddies, we're not anything." There was a stillness to his words laced with apathy that made the room feel even colder. Tate didn't seem to care about Noah anymore, not in the way that mattered. His expression was blank, eyes distant as if he were speaking to a stranger. "You can squawk all you want," Noah said. Despite Tate's obvious irritation, Noah tightened his arms around Tate's torso, refusing to let the moment disappear. His legs wrapped securely around Tate's waist, not hurting him but making his point very clear. "I'm not getting out of this bed until we talk about the elephant in the room." Tate gave him a sharp look. Noah didn't move. "Once you tell me what this is," Noah continued, his voice quieter now, "once you actually talk to me, I'll leave if that's what you want. But until then, we're dealing with it." For once, Tate didn't have an easy escape. The irony wasn't lost on Noah. The same man who had spent months shutting him out, refusing conversations, and building walls between them was now stuck because Noah had decided he wasn't running away. Tate tried to shift, but Noah held on stubbornly. It was almost ridiculous. The intimidating, powerful heir who could make entire rooms go silent was completely trapped by one stubborn person who knew him too well. "You are impossible," Tate muttered. Noah rested his cheek against him, a faint smile appearing despite himself. "Yeah," he replied, "you knew that when you let me into your bed." "I don't want to talk about that," Tate said angrily. His voice was cold and defensive. "Why I left is my business, it has nothing to do with you." Noah let out a short laugh, not because it was funny, but because he couldn't believe Tate was still trying to pretend this was simple. But Tate continued. "I don't want you here." The words were harsh, even though he was still holding onto Noah. "I was desperate, I could have died, I would have done this with anyone including Susie, you just happened to be here." Tate's eyes hardened. "That doesn't mean anything." Noah stared at him, the familiar ache settling in his chest. "Stop having some girl's fantasy," Tate muttered. "Stop making this into something it's not." For a moment Noah said nothing. Because that was Tate's greatest defense, turning everything into something meaningless before it had a chance to hurt him. But Noah remembered. He remembered the boy who had once chosen him without hesitation, the boy who had needed him and let himself be needed. And now, even while Tate insisted this meant nothing, he was still holding onto Noah like letting go was harder than admitting the truth. Noah didn't argue. He just looked at him quietly, waiting for Tate to realize that some things couldn't be dismissed simply because they were inconvenient. "No," Noah said. Tate's scowl immediately returned, his hazel eyes narrowing as he looked down at him. "No, tell me why you left me," Noah continued. "Then we can make up and be friendly again." Tate didn't answer. Noah held his gaze. "Just admit it, admit that you acted like a bastard, that you were insensitive, selfish, and cold. Admit that you should have called me." He paused, his voice becoming quieter but no less determined. "You should have called me 1,000,000 times in the last year." Tate's expression hardened, but Noah didn't back down. "I'll take you back," Noah said. "I'll forgive you, I'll forget it happened, we can move on." His arms remained around Tate, refusing to let him hide behind anger or silence. "But first you have to admit that this was your fault, you have to admit how you could have done better." Noah looked up at him. "And you have to promise me you'll do better next time." The room went quiet. Tate stared down at him with a deep scowl, the kind that usually made everyone else back away. But Noah had known him too long to be intimidated by it. He knew that behind the anger was something else. Something Tate still wasn't ready to say. "Just humble yourself," Noah said. His voice wasn't cruel, it was tired. It was the voice of someone who had spent a year carrying hurt and was finally asking Tate to acknowledge it. "I'm not asking for much, Tate, you were wrong." Tate's scowl deepened, but Noah continued. "You were a bastard, you were a terrible bedfellow, you took me for granted, you acted like me, opening my home to you, making space for you, and choosing you every day was something that didn't matter." The words hung heavily between them. "I have every right to tell you to fuck off." Noah stopped. For a few seconds he couldn't say anything else. Because, as angry as he was, as hurt as he had been, the truth was still sitting there between them, the thing he had never been able to erase. "But instead I love you," Noah finally said. His voice cracked slightly. "I love you, Tate." Tate's expression shifted just barely. "I love you, Tay," Noah repeated, quieter now, "so just apologize." He held onto him, not letting the moment disappear behind another argument. 22 years of sleeping beside each other, trusting each other, and having a relationship that must mean something. That's not anything we should throw away because you acted like an ass. Noah looked up at him. "Make it right." A silence followed. "I had 12 months of lonely nights because you left," Noah said. "You need to understand that. You need to account for those nights. You need to understand what you took away when you walked out." For once, Noah wasn't asking Tate to be perfect. He was asking him to admit that he had hurt someone who loved him. Noah sniffled. The tears came before he could stop them, hot and unstoppable as they slipped down his cheeks. He tried to wipe them away, but instead his hand moved against Tate's chest, using the warmth there to dry his face. The irony wasn't lost on him. The person who had hurt him the most was also the person he was still reaching for. Above him, Tate looked down with that familiar hazel-eyed glare, his expression hard and unreadable. To anyone else, it might have looked intimidating, like Noah was nothing more than a nuisance he wanted gone. But Noah stayed. His lip trembled. "No, Tate," he whispered, "please." The anger in his voice had faded, replaced by something much more vulnerable. "Apologize, for old time's sake, for all the years we've had." His breath shook. "You hurt me." The words came out cracked and fragile. "You hurt me really bad." Noah looked up at him, tears still falling. "If you ever care about me even the tiniest bit." The question seemed to hurt him more than the anger ever could. "You should apologize," Noah continued. "You should apologize because you wounded and stomped on my heart of your bestest buddy in all the world, Tate." His voice broke. "I was the person who shared everything with you." Noah swallowed hard. "I ate off your plate when we were kids. I was there for everything. I was there when nobody else was." More tears slipped down his face. "How could you treat me like that?" His voice became smaller. "How could you abandon me?" For a moment, Noah didn't look like the stubborn person who had been holding Tate in place. He looked like a child waiting at a window for someone who promised they would come home, sitting there for hours, hopping, only to realize the person he was waiting for wasn't coming. His shoulders shook slightly. His lip trembled in pain. And then he went quiet, still holding onto Tate, waiting for the answer he had spent 12 months needing. Tate slowly got off Noah. The change was immediate. For the first time in several minutes, Noah wasn't wrapped around him. The warmth and closeness that had felt so familiar disappeared as Tate moved away, leaving Noah sitting there on the mattress, still overwhelmed and struggling to collect himself. Noah was still blubbering quietly, his breathing uneven, tears continuing to fall despite his attempts to wipe them away. He had finally said everything he had carried for the past year, the hurt, the loneliness, the anger, the love, and now he was left exposed and vulnerable. Tate sat beside him. For a brief moment the room was silent. Then without warning, Tate's foot came out of nowhere. His bare foot struck Noah, catching him completely off guard and sending him tumbling off the edge of the mattress. Noah hit the floor with a hard clunk. The impact knocked the air out of his lungs. The carpet softened part of the fall, but the edge near the hardwood wall was unforgiving, leaving him stunned and sore. With nothing protecting him from the cold floor, the shock of the impact ran through his entire body. For several seconds, Noah couldn't do anything except lie there and try to breathe. Then he slowly opened his eyes. Above him was the person he had spent his whole life trying to understand. The meanest, enraged, hazel-eyed bully he had ever known. Tate stared down at him from the mattress, glaring and scowling as if Noah had somehow crossed a line. His expression was hard, almost like Noah had invaded his territory instead of simply asking for an apology. And that was what hurt. It looked like everything Noah had just said, the tears, the memories, the pain, had sounded completely ridiculous to Tate. Immature. Unnecessary. Avoidable. Like the last 12 months of heartbreak were something Noah should have simply gotten over. The words that came out of Tate's mouth crushed whatever hope Noah had been holding onto. For a brief moment, Noah had believed that maybe this was the turning point. Maybe Tate would finally admit he was wrong. Maybe he would apologize, maybe he would acknowledge the pain he had caused and they could somehow find their way back to what they had been. But Tate had no intention of doing any of that. The coldness returned. The walls went back up. And Noah realized that the warmth they had shared in the bed had not changed anything, not in the way he had hoped. Tate looked down at him with that familiar hard expression, his hazel eyes sharp and unreadable. "You seriously think this is going to fix everything?" Tate said. His voice was flat. "You think because we ended up in the same bed for one night, suddenly everything goes back to the way it was?" Noah stared up at him stunned. Tate shook his head, almost like he couldn't believe the conversation was happening. "This is exactly what I mean. You make everything into something bigger than it is." The words landed heavier than Noah expected. "I needed warmth," Tate continued. "You were here, that's all." Noah's face fell. Tate looked away for a moment before adding, "I don't owe you some apology just because you decided to build a story around this." And there it was. The thing Noah had been afraid of. Tate wasn't reaching for him. He wasn't trying to repair what they had lost. He was trying to erase it. Noah lay there on the floor, staring up at the person he had spent years loving, realizing that the hardest part wasn't that Tate wanted distance. It was that Tate seemed determined to convince himself that Noah had never mattered at all. "Just go downstairs to the couch, I'm sick of you." Tate's words landed like a punch to Noah's gut. His heart shattered in that instant, the fragments scattering through his chest. After everything, the 22 years of closeness, the nights like this one they used to share, and 12 months of silence that had felt like an eternity, Tate was discarding him like yesterday's trash. Noah had held him through the freeze, poured his own heat into saving him, and now, thrown away the moment Tate could stand on his own again. The rejection burned hotter than any fire they could have built. Noah's throat tightened, a lump forming as tears pricked at the corners of his eyes. He tried to stand up, shifting his hips and twisting his shoulders in a futile attempt to slide off the floor to reclaim the warmth they had shared and Tate so rudely denied this morning. His palms pressed against the solid hardwood, fingers splaying over the defined ridges of Tate's floor, but it was hopeless to wait for Tate to extend a hand to help him up. Tate didn't budge, his larger mass, 25% heavier, 5 inches taller, making any resistance pointless. Noah tried to get up and crawl back into Tate's bed where he wasn't wanted anymore. Tate was built like a machine, every inch honed and powerful, his body a testament to years of discipline that Noah could never match. Tate was sex on legs, a physical image of sexuality and desire, while Noah, with his slight build and barely there muscles, was just a small, wiry twink in comparison, his efforts as effective as a breeze against stone. Tate's arm pointed at the door, ordering Noah to leave. Tate's face remained impassive, staring at the wall as if Noah's distress was background noise. "Please, Tate," Noah whispered, his urges growing weaker as the tears finally spilled over. Hot tears ran down his cheeks, soaking into the carpet beneath his head. He cried openly now, the sobs hitching in his chest, each one a raw expression of the hurt ripping through him. "You can't just say that, after last night, after everything. Are we nothing? We were." His voice broke, trailing off into a choked gasp, the emotional distance Tate wielded like a weapon cut deeper than any physical hold. Noah's body trembled, not from cold this time, but from the ache of abandonment. Tate finally shifted, propping himself up on one elbow to look down at Noah. His eyes were cold, devoid of the spark that had once flickered there during their closer days. "What do you want me to say?" he asked, his voice steady and uninterested. "That it meant something? It was just warmth, survival, don't make it more than it is." He rolled slightly to the side, but not enough to free Noah completely, his leg still hooked over Noah's thigh, keeping him in place. Noah's hands balled into fists against Tate's mattress, but the fight drained out of him as another wave of tears came. "It was more, for me, it was always more, you know that." He turned his face away, pressing his cheek to the mattress to hide the vulnerability, but the wetness betrayed him. Snot mixed with tears, his breath coming in uneven bursts. "Why are you doing this, pushing me away like I'm worthless?" Tate sighed, a sound devoid of empathy, and sat up fully now, his weight lifting just enough for Noah to scramble back against the headboard. But Tate didn't move away, he stayed on the bed, his nude form silhouetted against the pale morning light filtering in. His muscles flexed subtly as he rubbed a hand over his face, the 8-pack tightening with the motion. Orphans like you are worthless to rich boys like me. I should have pushed you away or left you alone after college, because that's what it is now. I'm married, you're nothing. We stopped being whatever we were a long time ago. Last night was a mistake, a medical emergency, a necessity. Noah curled his knees to his chest, wrapping his arms around them as if to hold himself together. The tears flowed freely, his small frame shaking with the force of his emotions. A mistake? You grabbed me, you needed me, and now I'm just supposed to walk away like it didn't happen? His voice rose, laced with desperation. Tell me you don't feel anything for me, look me in the eye and say it. Tate met his gaze, unflinching. I don't. The lie or truth, Noah couldn't tell, hung between them, sharpening the pain. Tate's apathy was a wall Noah couldn't climb, his emotional rejection as immovable as his physical strength. Go downstairs, get some coffee or something, I need to sleep. I'm sick of your company and girlish pleas. But Noah didn't move. He sat there, crying harder, the sobs echoing in the small room. The cabin felt smaller, suffocating under the weight of their fractured bond. Memories flooded him, their younger days, laughing through similar chills, whispering secrets in the dark. Now it was all tainted by this cold dismissal. I hate you for this, Noah murmured through his tears, though the words lacked conviction. He loved Tate too much to mean them, even as the rejection carved him hollow. Tate stood then, his taller frame towering over the bed as he grabbed a pair of pants from the floor. He pulled them on without a word, his back to Noah, the muscles in his shoulders rippling with tension he wouldn't admit to. Hate me if you want, it changes nothing. Tate paused at the door, hand on the knob. But don't stay up here pitying yourself, we're adults, act like it and stop having schoolgirl fantasies. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving Noah alone with his tears. The bed felt vast and empty now, the warmth they had shared evaporated like morning mist. Noah wiped at his face, but the crying didn't stop, each breath a reminder of the buddy he had lost, not just for a year but perhaps forever. Downstairs he could hear Tate moving about, the clatter of a mug, the indifference in his solitude. Noah's heart, broken and raw, wondered if there was any thawing left to be done in Tate's heart, yet even in the pain a stubborn spark remained. Noah wouldn't leave, not yet, not until he fought for what they had been. He pulled on his clothes with trembling hands, the fabric rough against his tear-streaked skin, and headed downstairs. The emotional storm raged on, unresolved, pulling them back into the orbit they couldn't escape. In the kitchen, Tate stood by the counter, pouring steaming coffee into a mug. His posture was rigid, the 8-pack visible through the thin shirt he had thrown on, a reminder of the physical chasm between them. Noah entered quietly, his eyes red-rimmed and puffy. We need to talk about this, Noah said, his voice steadier now, though the hurt lingered. Tate didn't turn. There's nothing to talk about. He took a sip, the steam rising like a barrier. There is, you can't just erase us. Noah stepped closer, his smaller hand reaching out to touch Tate's arm. The contact was electric, a jolt of the familiarity they both pretended to ignore. Tate pulled away, setting the mug down with a thud. I already have, but his voice wavered just a fraction, betraying the apathy he clung to. Noah's tears threatened again, but he held them back. Liar. If you really didn't care, you wouldn't have held on so tight last night. Tate spun then, his eyes flashing with something, anger, regret. Last night was medically necessary, don't romanticize it. He loomed over Noah, the height difference making Noah feel even smaller, more vulnerable. I wasn't the one who stripped me down, Noah shot back, his chin lifting defiantly despite the quiver in his lip. Tate's jaw clenched, the muscle there jumping, but Noah continued. And I wasn't the one who stayed away for a year. The accusation hung, turning the knife. Noah yelled, fresh tears spilling. You left first, married her, then shut me out. It was the right thing. Tate's voice was low, but the apathy cracked, emotion seeping through. For whom? Noah pressed, closing the gap until their chests nearly touched. Tate's hand came up, gripping Noah's shoulder, not gently but not harshly either. For everyone, including you. Noah shook his head, crying openly again. It wasn't, look at us now. The right thing for Noah Lunas is not to be away from Tate Blue. You and I need each other. I can't sleep without you. I want our relationship back. Don't you want it back? Noah's lip trembled as fresh tears spilled all over his cheeks, blinding the blonde's vision of the kitchen. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken truths. Tate's grip softened, his thumb brushing Noah's collarbone inadvertently. For a heartbeat, the old connection flickered, then Tate released him, stepping back. "Stop acting like a fag, Noah." Noah's mouth hung open in shock. Tate had never called Noah a homophobic slur or teased him about not being as alpha masculine like Tate was. "Go home, Noah, before this gets worse for you." But Noah didn't. He stood there, tears streaming, refusing to let go of the thread between them. The morning light grew brighter, illuminating the fractures but also the potential for mending, if Tate would only allow it. The coffee pot cooled untouched, a symbol of the chill settling back in. Tate retreated to the living room, sinking into a chair, his mind a whirlwind he wouldn't voice. Noah followed after a moment, perched on the edge of the couch, his small frame dwarfed by the space. "Tell me why," Noah pleaded softly. "Why push me away now? Why didn't you tell me in person where I could wish you well and give you a hug? Why did you leave that ugly, impersonal, cruel, and insensitive note that showed how distant you were?" Tate stared at the floor. "I didn't leave because caring hurts, I'm gone because I can do better than you." Noah's heart twisted anew. Where is the boy who yelled at bullies that they would be lucky to spend the night in Noah Lunas' bed? What happened to you, Tate? Why are you cold and distant, and why are you an asshole? I get it if you're scared, but running away doesn't fix it or make our feelings disappear. Tate turned towards Noah. "Feelings?" Tate spat the word as it offended him. "What fucking feelings are you talking about?" The cruelty of it landed harder than Noah expected. Noah flinched. Not because Tate was angry, he had seen Tate angry 1,000 times before. It was the way he said it, the complete dismissal. The way Tate made something that had meant everything to Noah sound like a ridiculous fantasy he had invented. Tate laughed. Not a warm laugh, not the kind Noah remembered from childhood. A bitter, mocking laugh, like the entire idea was absurd. "Just because we had a sleeping arrangement so I wouldn't freeze to death doesn't mean I worshipped the ground you walked on," Tate said. His voice dripped with sarcasm. "I don't have feelings for you." Noah stared at him. The words seemed to echo. Tate shook his head as if Noah were the one being unreasonable. "Sure, I have some good memories," he continued. "There were times you weren't completely boring me to death." Noah's expression changed, the hurt becoming harder to hide. "But don't confuse memories with something more," Tate said. "I'm not going to give you anything now that I have a normal life." Each sentence felt like another door closing. "Instead of blubbering, crying, and chasing after a married man," Tate continued coldly, "why don't you have some self-respect and let us both move on?" Noah didn't answer. For once he couldn't. Because the person standing above him wasn't just rejecting the moment. He was rejecting years of memories, years of trust, and everything Noah had believed they meant to each other. And the hardest part was that Noah still remembered the boy Tate had been, the one who would have never spoken to him this way. That was the person Noah was still searching for. But all he could see now was the man who wanted him gone. "What other bullcrap have you imagined in your mind?" Tate laughed. The sound was sharp and dismissive, like the very idea offended him. "You think just because we ate at the same dinner table that we have some kind of soulmate connection?" Tate asked, his voice dripping with condescension and sarcasm. "You think because we've shared a room, shared memories, and you've seen me vulnerable more times than anyone else that somehow means we're star-crossed?" He shook his head, laughing again. "You think we're going to end up under the same tombstone, that our names are written in the stars?" Tate looked at him like the thought was completely absurd. "What kind of romance novels have you been reading? What fantasy world are you living in? Because it isn't reality." His words became colder. "Reality says a rich, straight guy like me wouldn't find someone like you remotely attractive." He looked Noah over with a cruel expression. "Look at you." A pause. "You're a 3. His mouth twisted. "And that's being generous." The insult hung in the air. Noah didn't move. The worst part wasn't even the cruelty of the words themselves. It was how casually Tate said them, as if he were correcting a simple misunderstanding instead of tearing apart something Noah had spent years believing in. The boy Noah remembered would have never spoken to him that way. But the man standing in front of him seemed determined to make sure Noah understood exactly how little he believed he was worth. Noah felt like he was being hit over and over again. Not physically. Something worse. Every word felt like an emotional punch, like Tate was using him as a punching bag and never stopping to see the damage he was leaving behind. But Tate kept going. Just because my mother thought you were good enough to join this godforsaken family of mine doesn't mean we're brothers, Tate said coldly. Noah stared at him. To be brothers, you'd have to be my equal. Tate gave a bitter laugh. And you're not. The words sank deeper than Noah wanted to admit. Tate looked at himself with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. Look at me, he said, I'm sex on legs. Then his eyes moved back to Noah, and the cruelty returned. And you look like you just stepped out of a Gap store at the mall. Noah felt another invisible blow land. Tate's expression hardened. And don't start building some gay fantasy in your head about us. Don't bring those perverted, sick ideas into my space. Any gay crap you force on me will result in you limping off the property. Noah shook in fear. His voice was sharp, filled with the same anger and defensiveness he had used to keep everyone away. If you want some perfect little life, a house with a white picket fence and someone who sees you the way you want to be seen, then go find a bitch somewhere else. He looked away for a moment before adding, find someone who wants what little you offer, find someone who chooses you. The words were brutal, but underneath them was something Noah couldn't ignore. This wasn't the Tate he remembered. This was either someone lashing out, someone determined to destroy the bond before he had to admit it mattered, or Tate felt nothing and didn't care about Noah anymore. And somehow, that hurt even more because Noah hadn't a clue which was reality. The conversation looped, circling the drain of their shared pain. Hours passed in fits of dialogue and silence, Tate's emotional walls holding firm while Noah chipped away with his vulnerability. By mid-morning, exhaustion claimed them both, but the undercurrent of tension promised more confrontations ahead. Their history, strained and raw, demanded reckoning, no matter how much Tate's apathy tried to bury it. The kitchen air hung thick with the scent of cooling coffee and unspoken regrets, the morning light slanting through the window to cast long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Tate stood by the counter, his shirt discarded somewhere in the living room, his bare torso a map of taut muscles honed from years of pushing his body to its limits. The 8-pack rippled subtly with each breath. A silent testament to the strength that had always dwarfed Noah's slighter frame. Tate gripped the edge of the counter, knuckles whitening, as if anchoring himself against the tide of emotion threatening to pull him under. Noah couldn't hold back anymore. The words from their earlier exchange echoed in his ears, fueling the fire that had smoldered in his chest for too long. He crossed the short distance between them in 2 steps, his smaller body launching forward to wrap around Tate's in a desperate hug. His arms circled Tate's waist, slim and compact against the broader, more solid form, fingers splaying out to press firmly into the ridges of Tate's abs. Tate's skin was warm now, no longer the icy chill of the night before, but the contact sent a jolt through Noah all the same, familiar, aching, irreplaceable. He didn't care that Tate was shirtless, the vulnerability of it only amplified the rawness of the moment. Noah buried his face against Tate's chest, the steady thump of Tate's heartbeat a cruel reminder of what had been lost. Tears came unbidden, soaking into Tate's skin as Noah's body shook with quiet sobs. He sniffled, the sound muffled against the unyielding muscle. You don't throw away 22 years of closeness and sentiment unless you're scared, Noah choked out, his voice breaking on the words. For me, or whatever we were, we had a relationship for 22 years and you just left without saying goodbye, without even hugging me. You're a bastard. The accusation hung in the air, sharp and unfiltered, born from a year of pent-up grief. Tate's body tensed under the embrace, his arms hanging limp at his sides, refusing to reciprocate. He stared straight ahead at the wall, jaw set in that emotionless mask he wore like armor. The silence from him was deafening, a void that swallowed Noah's pleas. Noah pulled back just enough to speak, his fingers digging deeper into Tate's abs as if holding on could force the truth out. He sniffled again, wiping his nose on the back of his hand before pressing closer. You made me dependent on your body to sleep, your warmth, your strong arms around me at night, and then you take it away. His voice rose, laced with betrayal. I haven't been able to sleep for over a year. How could you, you bastard? Another sniffle escaped, ragged and wet as fresh tears welled up. How could you leave me like that all alone in the large house without you? Noah's voice quivered, his lips trembled in raw hurt as the blonde's love for Tate was laid bare. The words dissolved into full cries. Noah's slim frame trembling against Tate's unmoving one. He tilted his head back, looking up with those wide, Bambi eyes innocent and pleading, rimmed red from the endless flow of tears. They searched Tate's face for any crack in the facade, any sign of the man who had once held him through storms both literal and figurative. But Tate wasn't looking at him. His gaze remained fixed on some distant point, avoiding the raw vulnerability staring up at him. That silence told Noah everything he needed to know, a confirmation of the abandonment, the indifference that had festered in the space between them. It was worse than words, this refusal of Tate's to engage, to acknowledge the pain he had caused. Noah's cries grew louder, a wail, his breath hitching as he clutched at Tate's sides. "You used me for warmth, for companionship, for everything, you used me." His voice trembled, breaking on the last syllable, the accusation a knife twisting in his own heart as much as Tate's. "I loved you, we were buddies and you abandoned me, go ahead and freeze at night, see if I care." With that, Noah shoved away, his hands sliding off Tate's abs in a final, reluctant release. He stumbled back a step, tears streaming down his cheeks, his small chest heaving with the force of his sobs. The kitchen felt too small, the air too thick to breathe in. Without another glance, Noah turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing softly as he headed toward the door. He didn't grab his coat, didn't pause to wipe his face, just left, the screen door banging shut behind him like a punctuation mark on their shattered bond. A few hours later, Noah came back to Talia's home. Of course he did. Because Noah's anger towards Tate Blue was easy for exactly 20 minutes before the ache to hold the dark-haired stud became unbearable. The streets were dark now, rainy and mildly cold, and Noah sat in his car outside the Blue Mansion, gripping the steering wheel hard enough to hurt. His eyes burned from crying earlier. He told himself he only came back to get his phone charger. Or maybe to scream at Tate again. Maybe because some awful part of him needed Tate to stop him from leaving twice. But the second Noah pulled into the driveway, his stomach twisted. There were cars parked outside that he didn't recognize. Big trucks, a black SUV, a Dodge Viper RT10, a BMW 7 Series E38, and a Nissan Skyline GTR R32 were parked in the driveway. The porch light was on. The house was louder than it should have been. Not party loud, not Tate loud, just television is too loud. The heavy drone of commentators, the sharp whistle of a referee, the occasional grunt of men reacting to a play. Noah frowned. Slowly he got out of the car. The second he stepped inside, the smell hit him first. Beer, sweat, salt. The living room was packed with 8 alpha-muscular men. Big men, broad shoulders, baseball caps, expensive watches, boots kicked up on the coffee table. Every single one of them looked aggressively straight in the kind of curated masculine way that Noah had spent his whole life learning how to avoid. Sports jerseys, deep voices, casual sprawl. The game was played across the television in flashing colors. Noah stepped onto the squeaky floorboard between the entryway and the entertaining room, and the sharp creak cut through the noise like a warning. Almost instantly, 24 unfamiliar faces turned in his direction. For a moment, the room went quiet. Conversations paused, drinks stopped halfway to mouths. Everyone looked at him as if he had accidentally walked onto a stage where he hadn't been invited. Noah felt the weight of their attention settle over him. These people didn't know him. They only saw an interruption, someone who had wandered into their carefully controlled evening and broken the rhythm of whatever game, conversation, or performance they had been enjoying. He stood there for a second, unsure whether to apologize or keep walking. The room seemed to study him, measuring him, wondering who he was and why he was there. Then Noah noticed the way some of them looked at him, not with curiosity but with judgment, like he had stepped into a world with rules nobody had bothered to explain. He swallowed, forced himself to straighten his shoulders, and continued forward anyway. If they wanted to know who had interrupted their night, they would find out. Silence swallowed the room. Noah froze halfway through taking off his shoes. And then he saw Tate. Tate was sitting in the blue designer armchair near the couch, one ankle over his knee, holding a half-empty bag of chips. Plain chips. Not the spicy kettle-cooked ones he liked. Not the ridiculous neon-dusted chips he always inhaled at 2 in the morning while complaining they chemically improved his mood. Just bland salted chips. Very heterosexual, very straight, very generic and boring. Tate looked miserable. Not devastated. Not crying. just flattened, like someone had pressed all the air out of him. One of the men on the couch snorted quietly under his breath. Another leaned back slowly, eyes sweeping over Noah in loud, oblivious judgment, taking in the smaller blonde body and unstyled hair, the Gap clothes and cheap shoes Noah wore that night, the soft sweater Noah had thrown on because he'd been crying too hard earlier to care what he looked like. Their expressions all carried the same thing. Contempt. Not fear. Not confusion. Recognition. The kind gay men reserved for other gay men they thought were embarrassing or unnatural. Noah felt heat crawl violently up his neck. Every set of eyes seemed to travel over Noah, silently cataloging every detail: his worn clothes, his inexpensive shoes, his awkward, gangly frame made him look like he hadn't quite grown into himself yet. He could almost hear the assumptions forming before anyone said a word. They probably thought he was staff, the maintenance guy, the housekeeper's son, someone who had wandered too far from where he belonged. Nobody important, nobody is worth stopping a conversation for. Noah knew that look, the quick assessment people made when they decided your place in the room before you ever opened your mouth. To them, he wasn't a person with a history or a name. He was an inconvenience, someone who didn't match the polished image surrounding them. The expensive clothes, the confident postures, the effortless way everyone carried themselves made Noah feel even more out of place. He became painfully aware of every thread in his shirt, every inch of space his body took up. But underneath, the embarrassment was something else. A quiet frustration. Because they didn't know him. They didn't know what he had survived, what he had endured, or the people in that room who actually did know his worth. They had already decided what he was before he ever had the chance to prove them wrong. The irony of the situation was that none of these men had any idea who they were actually looking at. They saw Noah's clothes and assumed they understood his place in the world. They saw the modest appearance, the unassuming posture, the ordinary-looking home, and decided he must be someone who belonged in the background. They couldn't have been more wrong. Noah wasn't staff. He wasn't the relative of someone who worked for the Blue family. He wasn't an outsider who had accidentally wandered into their world. He was someone who had been part of that world for years. Since he was 10 years old, Noah had attended society events alongside Tate and the Blue family. He had grown up sitting at tables with executives, attorneys, investors, and some of the most influential people in Los Angeles. He knew businessmen by their first names because they had known him for most of their lives. He knew the kind of people others spent years trying to gain access to: bankers, lawyers, power brokers, and professionals whose names carried weight in Beverly Hills. Noah had built his own reputation, his own connections, and his own fortune. He wasn't someone's spoiled child or Nepo baby by standing on a privileged acquaintance. He was a young man with an impressive network, a sharp mind, and an $80 million fortune behind his name. But Noah had never been interested in displaying any of that. That was the part nobody in the room understood. Noah didn't dress like someone trying to prove he belonged. He didn't walk into rooms announcing his wealth, his connections, or the people who would answer his calls. His clothes were comfortable. His house, the simple rambler he owned, looked ordinary. Nothing about his appearance suggested that he was earning millions a year through his own business. And Noah liked it that way. He preferred being underestimated. He wanted people to know him before they knew his bank account. He didn't want dates, acquaintances, or strangers treating him differently because of money. Outside of his close friends at Brown University and Tate's family, very few people knew the truth. The men staring at him thought they had figured him out. They had mistaken humility for insignificance. And Noah had learned long ago that sometimes being invisible was the greatest advantage a person could have. Noah actually liked wearing clothes from the Gap. To everyone else, it probably looked like a sign that he didn't have money, something cheap, something ordinary, something that belonged to someone who didn't have access to anything better. But for Noah, it meant something completely different. Those clothes reminded him of simpler times, of when he and Tate were younger and would go to the mall just to find something to do. They weren't attending exclusive events or sitting in rooms full of powerful people. They were just two kids walking around, wasting time, laughing, and trying to make the day interesting. Wearing those clothes kept Noah connected to that version of himself. It reminded him where he came from. He hadn't forgotten the years before the money, before the connections, before people cared who he knew. He still remembered what it was like to live without luxury, and he didn't want success to erase that part of him. The inexpensive shirts and casual clothes weren't an embarrassment, they were a choice. Noah dressed differently when he needed to be a professional. In business settings, he understood appearances, expectations, and the importance of presenting himself properly. He knew how to walk into a room full of executives and command respect. But when he went to the cinema, ran errands, or spent time alone, he didn't want to feel like he was still at work. He wanted to be Noah, not the businessman, not the person with connections, not the person people measured by his achievements. Just Noah. And if someone looked down on him because he was wearing a $20 shirt instead of a $1,200 sweater, that was their problem. Anyone who needed a price tag to determine someone's value wasn't someone whose opinion Noah needed. Noah stood quietly near the edge of the room, his attention settling on Tate. He wasn't demanding attention. He wasn't waiting for Tate to make some dramatic statement or announce his accomplishments to a room full of strangers. That wasn't Noah's style, and it never had been. He simply waited. His eyes stayed on his former roommate. Hopping Tate would do the natural thing, the polite thing. The thing anyone would do when bringing someone into a room full of people who didn't know them. Introduce him. Not because Noah believed he was important enough to require an introduction. Not because he thought his presence deserved some kind of special acknowledgement. It was just basic courtesy. Noah was standing inside the house, surrounded by people who clearly knew each other, and Tate was the one person in the room who could easily connect him to everyone else. A simple, "This is Noah," would have been enough. It would have shown that Noah wasn't some stranger who had wandered in or someone who could be ignored. Without an introduction, he was left suspended between worlds, present but unnoticed, familiar to Tate but unknown to everyone else. And that was what bothered Noah most. Not their assumptions, not the way they looked at his clothes or judged him before speaking to him. It was the feeling that Tate, the person who knew him best, might allow those assumptions to stand. Tate finally looked up from the chips. Their eyes met. For a second, Noah expected relief. Instead, Tate looked tired. One of the men muttered to Tate in a sarcastic, condescending tone, "Is that him?" Tate answered without lowering his voice. "Yeah." Noah's stomach dropped. The room kept staring. Like they were waiting to see what kind of spectacle he'd become. The silence stretched so long that Noah could hear the sports announcer rambling faintly in the background. Something about playoffs. Something about defense. Noah couldn't focus on any of it because every man in the room was staring at him as he'd walked in covered in blood. One of them sat forward slowly from the couch. Brunette hair, square jaw, an expensive-looking hoodie stretched across broad shoulders, the kind of guy who probably played hockey in college and still talked about it every chance he got. His eyes dragged over Noah with open dislike. Not curiosity. Not confusion. Dislike. Like Noah had already failed some invisible test just by existing. The brunette tilted his head toward Tate. "Hey Tate," he said casually, "who's the gay guy?" The room burst into scattered laughter. Noah actually choked on his own spit. Heat climbed violently into his face as his lungs seized for a second. He coughed once into his fist, mortified, eyes watering immediately. Nobody looked embarrassed for him. If anything, a couple of them laughed harder. Tate barked out a laugh too. A real laugh. It was funny. Like Noah being gay was funny. Tate leaned back deeper into the armchair, crinkling the bag of plain chips lazily in his hand. His socked foot rested over one knee like he didn't have a care in the world. Like Noah wasn't standing there feeling his entire body split open. The brunette smirked, seriously though. Tate looked at Noah for a second. And Noah hated himself for the stupid little flicker of hope that rose inside him. Because for one pathetic heartbeat, he thought Tate was going to say, "This is Noah. My former buddy. My favorite person." Instead, Tate frowned theatrically, squinting a little like he was trying to remember. "Wait," he said slowly, "Hey, what's your name again?" The room exploded. Not just laughter. Actual howling. One guy bent forward, clutching his stomach. Another slapped the couch cushion hard enough to make the beer bottles rattle across the coffee table. No fucking way. That's evil. Oh my god. Noah's face fell instantly. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Just visibly. Like something inside him had physically dropped. Because Tate was the boy who used to crawl through the door separating him from Noah while they slept apart. Tate was the person Noah had slept beside in the same bed for almost his entire life. Tate was the first voice Noah heard every birthday at midnight. The first person he called after funerals. After panic attacks. After breakups. 22 years of blissful domestication. And Tate was looking at him now like he was forgettable. Noah swallowed hard. Noah waited for Tate to say something, but the longer the silence lasted, the more he began to understand. Tate wasn't forgetting his name. He wasn't unsure of who Noah was. He was pretending. The realization settled slowly, and somehow that hurt more than the judgmental looks from the strangers in the room. The men around Tate had already decided Noah didn't belong there. They had looked at his clothes, his appearance, and the way he carried himself and assumed he was someone beneath their attention. And Tate knew that. Tate knew exactly who Noah was. He knew the years they had spent together. He knew the history they shared, the memories, the conversations, and the fact that Noah was not some random person who had wandered into the house. But in front of these men, Tate acted like Noah was just another unfamiliar face. Because acknowledging Noah meant admitting he knew him. It meant admitting that the person standing in cheap clothes at the edge of the room was someone who belonged there, someone who had a history with him, someone who couldn't simply be dismissed. And Tate didn't want to risk the reaction. The men he was trying to impress might look at him differently if they knew Noah mattered. They might question why someone like Noah was there. They might not see Tate as the same person if he openly claimed a connection to someone they had already judged. So Tate chose silence. He protected his image instead of offering Noah the smallest courtesy. And Noah stood there, realizing that the problem wasn't that Tate didn't know him. The problem was that Tate knew him and was choosing to act like he didn't. Noah couldn't escape the conclusion that settled over him. If Tate was willing to pretend he didn't even know him, then Noah's presence must have been embarrassing to him. That was the part that stung. Tate didn't have to make some grand declaration. He didn't have to tell the room about their entire history or explain every detail of their friendship. Noah wasn't asking for that. He would have accepted something simple. Yeah, we knew each other when we were younger. That was all. Even if Tate wanted to create distance, even if he wanted everyone in the room to understand that his life had changed, he could have acknowledged the truth. He could have said they came from different places, that they had once been close, that they had shared a part of their lives but were now on different paths. Noah could have handled that. But Tate didn't even do that. He acted as if Noah's name wasn't worth remembering. As if Noah wasn't someone who had mattered once. As if he were just another person passing through the room, someone whose presence didn't require an explanation. Someone like a waiter whose name nobody bothered to learn. And that was what made Noah's chest tighten. The stranger's judgment didn't surprise him. They didn't know him. They were only seeing what was in front of them. But Tate did know him. Tate knew exactly who was standing there. And yet, in front of these men, he chose to make Noah invisible. It's Noah, the blonde said sadly. His voice barely worked. Noah. Tate snapped his fingers immediately. Right, Noah. More laughter erupted around the room. Charles leaned back, wheezing, Nah, that was foul. Tate grinned. Noah felt heat crawling up his throat. Every instinct screamed at him to leave. But humiliation rooted him in place. Because walking out now would make this real. It would make it obvious how badly this hurt him. And these men, these aggressively masculine men with their broad shoulders and smug little smiles. They already smelled weakness in him like blood in water. Tate shook the chip bag absently. He's basically my mom's charity case, he said casually. Another round of laughter. Noah stared at him. Tate kept going. She friended him years ago, and now she thinks he's her son. One guy nearly spit out his drink laughing. Noah. That's brutal. Your mom adopted a twink. Tate snorted into his chips. I swear to God she likes him more than me. Charles looked Noah up and down openly. I mean, I get it. More laughter. Noah's chest tightened painfully. Not because they were funny. Because Tate was letting it happen. No. Encouraging it. Noah remembered being 16 and sick with the flu, half conscious on the couch while Tate's mother tucked blankets around him and called him sweetheart. That was the part Noah couldn't reconcile. Because he remembered a completely different Tate. He remembered the boy who had sat beside him for hours, keeping the volume on his video games low so Noah could sleep when he was sick. The same Tate who had been willing to put everything else aside just to make sure Noah wasn't alone with his pain. He remembered Tate reading stories to him when Noah felt miserable, trying to distract him from the discomfort and the fear. He remembered the gentle way Tate had taken care of him, running a hand through his hair, pressing a soft kiss to his cheek, rocking him back and forth while Noah drank from the straw because he was too exhausted to do much else. That Tate had been patient. Protective. Devoted. That Tate had looked at Noah like he mattered. And now Noah stood in a room full of strangers, watching that same person stay silent while people treated him like he was nobody. Like he was just the help. Like he was a waiter whose name didn't matter. The contrast was almost impossible to understand. How could someone who once held him so carefully now stand there and let others dismiss him so easily? Noah wasn't asking Tate to fight a battle for him, he wasn't asking Tate to prove anything. He just wanted the smallest acknowledgement that the person from those memories had been real. Because the Tate who stayed awake beside his bed, who comforted him, who cared for him when he was at his weakest, that Tate would have never allowed Noah to stand there feeling invisible. Back then, Tate used to glare at anyone who made Noah uncomfortable. Back then, Tate would have destroyed anyone who laughed at him like this. Now Tate was the one handing Noah over for entertainment. Charles gestured lazily toward Noah's sweater. So what's the gay's deal? Tate shrugged. He's always like this. Like what? You know, Tate waved vaguely, sensitive. The word dripped with contempt. Noah folded his arms tighter over himself. One of the guys smirked, that sweater's soft as hell. Another laughed, looks expensive. Looks moisturized. Looks like he owns a used car. The room cracked up again. Noah felt sick. Because none of them knew him. But they all understood instantly that he was different. And men like this loved tearing apart anyone different. Charles pointed toward Noah's rings. You wear those thrift store clothes every day. Noah glanced down instinctively. The Gap clothes suddenly felt childish. Yeah. Charles exchanged a look with another guy. Damn. Tate chuckled under his breath. Noah looked at him immediately. That hurt most. Not the strangers. Tate. Always Tate. Noah waited. At first he told himself there had to be a reason. Tate had plenty of opportunities to step in, more than enough chances to change the direction of the conversation. He could have easily interrupted the teasing with something simple. Hey guys, stop. Or even something casual. Yeah, he dresses like a regular guy, so what, he's not that bad. Or maybe just, let's get back to the game, leave him alone. Any of those would have been enough. Noah wasn't expecting Tate to make a dramatic speech defending him. He wasn't asking Tate to reveal their entire history or explain who Noah was to him. He just wanted Tate to show that there was a line. That Noah was a person, not entertainment. But Tate never drew that line. He let the comments continue. He let the jokes land. He sat there while the others turned Noah into a target, and instead of stopping it, he sometimes added to it, giving them more material, encouraging the conversation, feeding the laughter. And that was what hurt. Because Tate wasn't just allowing it to happen. He was participating. Noah finally understood why Tate acted like he didn't know his name. It wasn't forgetfulness. It wasn't awkwardness. It was part of the performance. Not knowing Noah's name made him easier to mock. It turned him from a person into a character, some random outsider the room could laugh at. The joke started before anyone even said anything cruel. The punchline was that Noah apparently wasn't important enough to know. And Tate let them believe that. The same person who once stayed awake beside Noah when he was sick, who comforted him, who made sure he felt safe, was now sitting back and allowing strangers to treat him like a joke. That was the betrayal Noah felt most. Not that strangers judged him. That Tate gave them permission to. For a moment, Noah tried to give Tate the benefit of the doubt. Maybe Tate was uncomfortable. Maybe these men were friends of Talia's or Chloe's and Tate didn't want to create tension in front of everyone. Maybe he was trying to avoid an awkward scene and planned to handle it later privately when there weren't a dozen people watching. Noah wanted to believe that, because the alternative hurt too much. So he gave Tate one last chance. He didn't walk away. He didn't immediately assume the worst. He waited until he could speak to Tate directly, face to face, and ask the question that had been sitting on his chest. Why aren't you stopping this? Not why aren't you defending him with some huge speech, not why aren't you telling everyone their history. Just why wasn't Tate doing anything? Noah wanted to see if there was still some part of the old Tate there, the person who would understand immediately once Noah said something. The person who would realize that letting the jokes continue had crossed a line. But Noah also knew what he needed to see, but Tate refused to do it in any way.